My name is Julian Fischer. I'm CEO of anynines, a cloud automation company with a strong focus on Cloud Foundry and data service automation. So the Renaissance is a period of history and a European cultural movement, well, I keep it short, which was characterized by an effort to revive and surpass the ideas and achievements of classical antiquity. So that's the part that's interesting. Revive and surpass the ideas and achievements of, well, in our case, Cloud Foundry, right? So the Cloud Foundry Renaissance, obviously, is then about thinking about what is in Cloud Foundry that should live on and what is in Cloud Foundry that may need some achievement. Personally, I'd say before we get to Cloud Foundry, we need to get the elephant in the room. And for quite a few years, this was obviously Kubernetes. You know, if you ask me back in 2016, 17 about the dynamic of Kubernetes and Cloud Foundry, and I still remember Cloud Foundry summits where, you know, all my fellow competitors, companies of a similar size, we've been in agony. It was a very bad feeling. We had the impression that Kubernetes will eat Cloud Foundry alive with skin and hair, as we say in Germany. Well, but actually what happened is, well, without any doubt, building custom platforms became very popular. So you're not en vogue if you don't build your own very custom platform with Kubernetes. And we've witnessed organizations of larger scales adapting Kubernetes. And that picture in the background is my personal interpretation of what I've witnessed, which is a creation of many disconnected clusters. Basically a nightmare of integration. And each cluster needs, a tremendous amount of love, in the sense that it consumes overhead and infrastructure resources, but also needs lifecycle management. And a lot of adoption patterns I've seen do not evolve around full automation. It's not that you can just ask a Kubernetes cluster, request a Kubernetes cluster, and you'll get something ready to use. No, it's more like a managed service approach where there's some automation, but there's still a lot of autonomation, where there's a combination between manual labor and automation. And I think that where Kubernetes is unavoidable, because the workload is inherently Kubernetes-based, or where mature DevOps teams need Kubernetes. Kubernetes is wonderful. I'm a big fan of Kubernetes. But at the same time, I believe it's with every hype, it becomes a belief. I believe I need to do this. And that's when decisions become less rational and problematic. And I think the flexibility that Kubernetes brings requires skill and effort. And if you're thinking about large organizations, I'm not talking about a startup, Silicon Valley style startup with a tremendous amount of money and the sexiness to attract the highest skilled people in the market. I talk about those average organizations that are relatively large, that have problems in attracting the unicorns of computer science into their organization. Well, they do have that, but only to some extent. So how do you write applications at scale with, let's say, that's not somehow degrading or anything, but with mediocre and average developers? And I would say you can have Kubernetes as a two-edged sword, in that sense that you may ask your organization something that it cannot deliver. So other things that are not present in Kubernetes is there's no open service broker API. I think there's a B missing. And subsequently, there's no marketplace. So if you're looking at a fleet of Kubernetes clusters, hundreds, or even maybe more than that, where and how do you consume data services? How do you provide your developers on-demand self-service if those central pieces are missing? So, well, multi-tenancy. If you're looking at 1,000 Cloud Foundry organizations, how do you put them into a Kubernetes cluster is a question that has been asked very, very often. And either you result in using too much Kubernetes clusters, or you'd have shared clusters with all the problems of multi-tenancy management, like fragmentation. Some people go, some people come, some use cases grow bigger than anticipated, and you get noisy neighborhood issues. I'd say the conclusion from this is that, although it's pretty popular to build custom organizations, it's harder than expected. And, I would say the shopping cart offered by the CNCF and all those very nice technologies that are in the Kubernetes ecosystem, I love them. But putting them together in a meaningful way is something that overwhelms a lot of organizations. So, bad humor ahead. Sometimes building blocks is not what you need. We just have to see that, although there's value in having smaller chunks that you can put together, sometimes you want the real thing. You want a platform as a service thing to run a load of applications, and this is where Cloud Foundry is the best. So I personally believe that to this day, if you run a lot of applications, a lot of 12-factor compliant applications that are cloud native, and you want to streamline user experience, there's no way around Cloud Foundry. And therefore, I postulate that the Cloud Foundry business case is still alive. Because otherwise, all those large organizations that we manage and help manage Cloud Foundry would have moved away already. Whereas any attempt to move large Cloud Foundry environments to anything else is basically a large and ugly lift and shift operation, which costs more than it actually brings. So why move away from something that just works, is my question. And this is regardless on whether you are talking about Cloud Foundry on VMs, or whether you're looking at Corifi, which integrates into a Kubernetes-centric landscape smoothly. So one platform, many tenants, more users, and even more apps. That's a promise of Cloud Foundry. And it still does that pretty nicely up to this day. So I think with all the emotions gone, there was a hype about Cloud Foundry 2015 or whatever the year was. You can't dial back the time. You can't tell people, well, Cloud Foundry is the next thing. And I personally believe that to some extent Cloud Foundry was oversold and underdelivered. Not because Cloud Foundry was bad, but because there were exaggerated expectations around it. So when you look at a company that's in the pursuit of digital transformation, they cannot just put everything on Cloud Foundry because there are applications that just don't fit the 12-factor manifest. And it's the 12-factor manifest that enables Cloud Foundry's unique abilities. So to me, it was pretty clear that at some point there must be something else, something in the middle, something that completes Cloud Foundry from the perspective of those large organizations. And in my belief, that's Kubernetes. But that doesn't mean that Cloud Foundry needs to go away. I believe that they can and should coexist. And one thing that I personally believe is very important about Cloud Foundry is its operational efficiency. Well, if you look at Cloud Foundry from a single person's perspective, you come home from office and you download Cloud Foundry on your laptop, no, it's not happening, right? It looks like this beast, and you look at Bosch for the first time and you're like, oh my God, that's too much. But if you build that one thing on your infrastructure and you run 1,000 apps on it, we've seen how organizations scaled from AWS to Azure to OpenStack, vSphere, whatnot, and went to Ali Cloud. And all the workloads that were on a Cloud Foundry, assuming proper data service automation, can't just be put on any other infrastructure. And it works at scale. Yeah, as I mentioned, the marketplace and the Open Service Broker API is already very important. So managing a lot of Kubernetes clusters is hard, where Cloud Foundry makes it easy. And I would also like to point out that if you think about the marketplace of Cloud Foundry, you still have to equip it with well-selected integrations for data service automation. And that was already a hard challenge. But if you look in doing that in Kubernetes, where you have a scattered landscape of a lot of clusters, that's even a more complex problem to solve. So the question is where to go from here. Well, unluckily, I have my glass ball at home, so there's more speculation than I actually intended to do, but without a glass ball, I mean, what can I do? Well, obviously, we have to coexist with Kubernetes, and Kubernetes is not the enemy. It's just, you know, what I'm referring to as the missing link. And taking that perspective, that makes Cloud Foundry a friendly neighbor. You have a Cloud Foundry where the 12-factor apps reside with the operational scale, the streamlined user experience, and then you have this area for more custom workloads. Now the problem is, how do you bring those things together? But before, you know, I would like to give some rules of thumb when to use Cloud Foundry for VMs and when to use Coryphi. Personally, I would say if you have a classic Cloud Foundry and it's large, keep it, because that's the best place where your apps can be. If you have one that's small or mid-sized and you fell in love with Kubernetes, maybe look at Coryphi. And if you don't have a streamlined PaaS experience for your developers and you're looking at building a lot of relatively simple applications that fit the 12-factor manifest, well, get a classic Cloud Foundry, because that's the best technology you can use for it. And Coryphi, I mean, if Bosch scares you and you don't want to have anything to do with VMs because VMs are bad and pods are, you know, the holy grail, well, then maybe Coryphi is for you. If vanilla Kubernetes doesn't match your needs because it's too, you know, basic, well, have a look at Coryphi. So if you're in an environment where there's only Kubernetes, you should have a look at Coryphi too. So also, if the Cloud Foundry Marketplace is not so essential to you, there are workarounds for this, I will briefly touch later, but for now. So I think Cloud Foundry, Coryphi, and Kubernetes can be one happy family. And one thing to maybe say as more like a recommendation for all of you is Cloud Foundry needs investments. We need companies who do not wait for companies like SAP and Broadcom to hand out free goodies. I'm guilty of that. When we entered, you know, anynines and a lot of those competitors of the same size, we were like, I don't know, puppies waiting for the mother to hand us something tasty to do. We maybe neglected our own responsibility to contribute to the ecosystem substantially. Maybe I'm more guilty of that than others, but I believe we need to place investments into Cloud Foundry and its future. So I believe, you know, as a data service automation person, that the data service challenge needs to be addressed. And we've recently open sourced the technology under Apache 2, which is called Clutch. And to put it in simple words, it's basically a Kubernetes native workload that introduces a client-server model where the server leverages cross-plane, but allows application clusters in Kubernetes to have a small client which then have abstractions for service instances, service bindings, service plans, backup and restore. That might sound familiar to you because it's Open Service Broker API inspired, and allows Kubernetes users to provision any automation, back-end automation natively through Kubernetes. And now there's going to be a generic Open Service Broker implementation for Clutch that allows you to consume any of those services from a Cloud Foundry as well, making the Clutch server something similar to the Cloud Controller, where there's a central governance and a central metadata registry, knowing where all the service instances and all the service bindings actually are. So you can answer questions like, what are service instances of Postgres that are vulnerable to the latest CVE? So if you have questions about Clutch or, you know, the future of Cloud Foundry, please, you know, just grab me here. I'll be around the whole day. My personal summary is Cloud Foundry's business case is pretty much alive. We should, you know, embrace Cloud Foundry as it is, and we should spread the word about people should have a look, even in 2024, with, you know, bootstrapping new Cloud Foundry environments based on Cloud Foundry VMs, based on Coryphi. And I think the overarching value that this ecosystem provides is still there and should continue to exist and flourish even. So I believe that once the hype is over, now it's time to look at it more objectively and see the beauty it actually brings. Thank you very much for today. I'm around. Please feel free to reach out.